be on our way. Okay, so here's week number 3 in our Unmistakable series. We're going to be looking through Exodus 15:22 to 17:16, and we'll be looking at some provisions that God has made for the people and their response to that, and what we can learn from that as well. So anyway, and just so you know, I'm coming to you live from my office at the church because
yay!
Hey, oh, looky there!
Look,
I know that
you
thing.
know this bookshelf.
Yeah, I think I may help put that one together.
Right, and so I can show you around. Look, there's all kinds of boxes and stuff. So anyway, I won't make you ill by watching that, but there are fewer boxes now than there were initially, so because there are books on the bookshelves. So, anyway, it'll be a work in progress over the next couple of weeks.
Oh, I'll bet.
We'll get there. But it feels good to be back in the office.
Yay!
At least just for a few hours today. So, all right. So the title of my message is "Look Around at All God Has Done," and it's this idea of when you read through these 3 that's last portion of 15, and you read all of 16 and 17, you see all of these ways that God has revealed himself as a provider for the people. And then you can even stretch it back to the Red Sea and the deliverance at Passover, and out of those amazing things that God is doing, the people still complain. They start this complaint, and I call it the complaint train. And they just are like, oh, we don't have any water. Oh, we don't have any food. Oh, why don't we just go back? And at least we had food there. So this idea is that they're so focused on the immediate needs that they have, they can't look up and see what God is doing for them. So that's kind of that's the gist of where I'm going in my message. So 15:22 begins or picks up after they've come through the Red Sea, and after they've had this Moses's song of celebration about the horse and rider and has been tossed into the sea kind of deal, and after Miriam's song. And so they set out from the Red Sea. So they are turning their back to Egypt, and they are setting out into the wilderness of Shur. They go 3 days, they find no water, and there it is. That's the first thing that they do is when they came there, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That's why it's called Marah. And the people complained, verse 24 says, what shall we drink? And Moses cries out to the Lord, and the Lord says, okay, there's a stick or a tree. If you look at the original language, it says a tree. I'm like, how does he throw an entire tree into the water? But that's not necessarily the point being. So he says he threw it in there, and the water becomes sweet, and made from a statue. If you will listen to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give heed to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. And then there's so the first answer to we don't have any water is tossing the branch into the water at Marah and turning it sweet. But then there's a second answer to the we don't have any water question, which is in verse 27, where they come to Elim, where there's 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. It's an oasis, basically. And they camp there by the water. And so if you've got roughly 1 million people that are moving, plus animals and things like that are moving through this wilderness, a place like Elim, is going to have enough supplies, enough water, and enough space for them to hang out for a little while. And so they do. And so God answers their cry, their complaining for water, with both the water being the bitter water turning sweet at Marah, and then the 12 springs of water and the 70 palm trees at Elim. Okay, so So just keep that in mind. That's one, that's two right there. You asked for water, I gave you twice as much as you needed. Then chapter 16 opens with them setting out from Elim. They go to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And then on the 15th day of the month, the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt, the whole congregation of the Israelites complained. So here we are again. And it said, if only we had died at the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So now they're hungry. They've had their thirst, and now they're hungry. So the Lord says to Moses, I'm going to make it rain bread. And not just bread. At this particular moment, he says there's going to be meat as well. So he begins to tell them about how to collect and how to handle this bread that they're going to get. And so he says, on each day, the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. On the sixth day, they will get twice as much. And Moses and Aaron tell them this is what's going to happen. And he says it's going to happen because he heard your complaining. And he says, when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord. So then 9 to 12 is my sermon text, because I'll spend most of my time talking about manna and bread from heaven. So then the glory of the Lord appears in a cloud, and the Lord says, I've heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And so for the first time, after they've left, in verse 13, we see that quail come up. And this is the first of only 2 times that the people eat quail. And the second time is not very pleasant. So the people, the quail come up, cover the camp, and they're just so docile. They just go out there and they get whatever they want, and they eat meat that evening. And then in the morning, manna shows up for the first time. And there's a layer of dew, and when the dew lifts, the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. And they look at each other and they go, in the original language, they go, manna, what is this? And so that just becomes its name. That's why they call it manna, because they didn't know what it was. And Moses says, this is the bread from heaven that the Lord has given you to eat. And then he tells them the instructions. Every day for 6 days, you go out and you get as much for that day. On the 6th day, you get twice as much, but you can't keep it overnight, because it will turn to worms. It'll have worms in it, and it'll turn to foul odor, and you can't eat it the next day. And then there's a couple of acts of disobedience. One is that some people keep it overnight, and they see that it turns to worms and has a foul odor. And then there's some on the 7th day, instead of keeping the Sabbath, they try to go out and get some more manna. And and the Lord's like, what's wrong with you people? Anyway, and Moses is angry with them as well. But morning by morning, they gathered it as much as they needed, and then it melts when the sun gets hot. Let's see. Let's see. So they call it manna. This is verse 31 in chapter 16. They call it manna because it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And then God says, I need you to put some aside for posterity, basically, and place it before the covenant. And then verse 35 says that they ate manna for 40 years until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. So as soon as they cross over in the book of Joshua, when they cross over into the land, then manna stops. But every day for 6 days a week, they get manna for the next 40 years. And then there's this little tidbit of an omer is a tenth of an ephah. So there you go. If you're doing some ancient measurements, that's how much manna they got every day. So then 17 has two stories of provision. One is the water from the rock. So they're in the wilderness of Sin, and they go as a congregation to the place called Rephidim, but there's no water. So again, we come back to this whole idea of not having water. And so they quarrel with Moses, this time, not so much complaining this time, but they're quarreling with Moses. And they says, give us water to drink. And Moses, why you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? But they're so thirsty, they complain. Why did you bring us out to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? So Moses cries out, what shall I do? And the Lord says, go ahead of the people, take some of the elders, take the staff that you struck the Nile with, and go in front of the rock at Horeb, strike the rock, water will come out of it, all the people can drink. Moses does so, and he calls the place Massah and Meribah, which means testing and quarreling, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord. So just so you know, Massah means test, and Meribah means quarrel. For some reason, at the second half of the verse, they flip the definitions. Just so you know. So Massah means test, and Meribah means quarrel. And they test the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Again, questioning that foundational lesson from the wilderness that God is with us. And then there's this really cool scene where the first battle that the Israelites face is against the Amalekites, the people of Amalek or however you want to say it. I just say the Amalekites. That's easier. And so Moses puts Joshua in charge of the army, and he sends him out, and Moses goes up to the top of a hill with the staff of God in his hand. And when Moses' hands are raised and the staff is raised, the Israelites prevail against the Amalekites. And when his hands come down, then the Amalekites prevail against the Israelites. And so Aaron and Hur go with Moses up to this place, up to this hill. And so what they do is they find a rock for him to sit on, and they have him sit down, and then they stand next to him on either side and lift up his hands. And they become, because he's growing weary, they become the ones who lift up his hands so that the people, so that Joshua defeats the Amalekites and has success there. And they built an altar, and they call it "The Lord is my banner." Also another name of the Lord, similar to the Lord who heals you. There's this one is "The Lord is my banner." I'm trying to remember I can't remember what the Hebrew word is for banner, but anyway, but that's not the last time they'll face the Amalekites as a nation. So all of these events, from the Amalekites to the water from the rock to manna to the bitter water made sweet, and you keep going back to the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army being drowned. You go all the way back to Passover from last week, and you see that God is over and over again showing his favor to the people, and yet what we hear from them is complaining. We hear, we don't have any water, any food, why are we out here? You know, there's this negative spirit that seems to permeate them, even though God has along the way told them that he will be with them. So anyway, so that's so I'll expound upon that and the things that happen to the people and to anybody that complains over the course of a long period of time. So that's an overview of the text for the week. The discussion questions on the study guide. So they start with if sort of a icebreaker kind of deal of if you ever gone more than a day without drinking water. If so, what was that like? If you haven't, do you know someone who has, and what can dehydration do to the human body? So, you know, a day without water, while difficult, it won't kill you, but it certainly doesn't do good things for you. It certainly won't help, you know, your blood chemistry. It won't help your digestion. It won't help your brain function. You'll have headaches and you'll be tired and all kinds of things. And so dehydration can be brought on even quicker than a day, just depending on what you're doing, whether you're outside and heat and things like that. So there's lots of tolls that get taken on your body when you're dehydrated. And one of the things that happens is that you don't think clearly, and you have a hard time processing what's going on around you. And so if the people have had no water for 3 days, and there's not a prospect of something for them to drink, then it sort of kind of makes sense that they're going to be upset and they're going to wonder what's happening here, and they're going to be a little short and they're going to be a little testy and they're going to be like, you know, you got to fix this. And so anyway, that's that. So again, we can kind of have some conversation around that dehydration issue. So question 2 says that the Israelites find themselves at Marah with plenty of water around them. None of it is fit to drink. So their response is to complain. And Moses's response, so they complain against Moses, and Moses does what he's supposed to do, which is to cry out to the Lord. And the Lord shows him a piece of wood, is what the NRSV says, a branch or a, you know, tree. It's technically, it's literally a tree is what the word is in the original language. It's some kind of piece of wood, branch, something like that. And he says, throw it in the water and it makes the water sweet. So the Lord responds to their cry for water by turning what was bitter, what was undrinkable, into something that was pleasing to their palate. So he responds with faithfulness. Then question 3 is farther than that. So how does the Lord provide for the people even beyond their immediate need for water? And so that should probably be verse 27, but in the parentheses there, because they come to a limb and there's this oasis. So you can go ahead and mark that as 27, not 26.
Okay.
I was probably typing quickly when I did that, so I apologize.
Well, the verse 26 is talking about the ordinance that he made for them. Would that be, you know, providing more for their spiritual needs, maybe than the physical?
Right. Yes, that's part of it as well, that they're going to remember this, and he's calling them to hold fast to what he's commanding them to do, so that the plagues that came upon Egypt don't get brought upon them as well. So very good. All right. So number 4, again, this is Gail, before you jumped on, Gary and I were talking about the number 45, the number of days, and 16:1, and depending on, my guess is, depending on the translation that you have, or the way in which you number particular days, there's wondering if it's 45 days or maybe only 30 days. Because if you look back to Passover, it happened on the 14-15 of that first month. But the way that I read it and the reason I get to 45 days is that it says on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. So I see that as beyond that 30 days, but I can be wrong, and it's okay. It's just the important part of it is that it doesn't take very long before the people start to complain again. So and ultimately forget what has just taken place in Egypt, that they've turned their back on 430 years of slavery through several, like 10 different miracles in the land of Egypt, plus the Red Sea, plus this water being made sweet, and they're landing in Elim and getting these 12 springs of water and these 70 palm trees, this oasis. And now they're still complaining. They're still in a negative sort of mindset. So
my favorite definition of adjective for them throughout the Old Testament is stiff-necked.
Yeah.
That one sticks with me all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a common one, and it makes sense, because when your neck is stiff, it's hard to turn one way or the other, or even go this way or this. You all you can see is what's right dead in front of you, and so yeah. So they complain, and it's the whole congregation. Just make sure I make a big point of that in my message, that it's the whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. So so it's all of them, and they complained to Moses and Aaron. And then the last question is, who responds? So it's actually the Lord that responds. And the Lord says to Moses in verse 4, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. So that's who the Lord responds to their complaint again. And that's, all along the way, we see the people complaining to Moses and Aaron, or just to Moses. And all along the way, then we see Moses and or Aaron then raising that complaint to the Lord, not in a complaining way, but they're crying out to him. So the way I look at it is that they're modeling for the people the direction that the complaint should go. It should go above Moses. It should go above Aaron. It should go to the Lord, not to them, because they'll say over and over, who are we? We're just, the servants of the Lord, you need to talk there. But as we'll see, when we get to 32, when I get to Exodus 32, the Israelites want something in front of them that they can see. And so they make the golden calf. There's all that. And they talk about, this is the God who brought you out of Egypt, because they can see it. So because Moses and Aaron are visible to them, then they go that direction. All right. Question 5 is, what are the specific instructions given about how manna will be provided and how it should be gathered and or stored? So again, you go out, you gather what you want, and enough for your family. And there's the let's see, where are we at here? On the 6th day, you gather twice as much, 2 omers apiece. And then on the 7th day, you don't go gather anything. And when you set it aside on the 6th day, then it won't turn foul. And then you eat it on the 7th day. So verse 26 says, 6 days you will gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none. Let's see. So back in the starting in like verse 15 of chapter 16. Gather as much as each of you need. This is verse 16. An omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents. Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less, but when they measured it, those who gathered had much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. So those are instructions. 6 days a week you gather it. On the 6th day, twice as much. Don't keep it overnight except for the 6th night. And then you eat that on the 7th day. And don't go out on the 7th day because that's the Sabbath. There won't be any. And I'm sure they, learn how to make manna casserole and manna souffle and manna cacciatore and whatever else, manna pot pie. So anyway, they probably get really creative with it. Let's see. What happens when the people ignore these instructions? It turns foul, has worms in it, and then they get the wag of the finger from Moses. Like, I told you not to do that. 1631 describes manna like coriander seed, white, with a taste like wafers made with honey. So it sounds like it tastes good. I mean, maybe a few times. I don't know, for 40 years in a row. Might get a little old.
I got to share with you one of the things I read.
Okay.
Jewish legend. So just to put that up front, Jewish legends supposedly tell us what this bread from heaven tasted like. One only had to desire a certain dish, and no sooner than he thought of it, than manna had the flavor of the dish desired.
Oh, very good.
The same food had a different taste for everyone who partook of it, according to his age. To little children, it tasted like milk. To the strong youths, like bread. To the old men, like honey. To the sick, like barley steeped in oil and honey. So anyway, that's it says here, but they also wrote that manna was bitter in the mouth of Gentiles. So anyway, that's just one of those. The internet doesn't lie, does it?
Right. No, everything's true on the internet.
Why do you think he only provided quail one time?
One of the commentaries I read said that it was a luxury kind of deal. Like, sometimes when we talk about daily bread and things like that, we point to manna. And oftentimes being satisfied with our daily bread keeps us in the right spirit. And then every once in a while, we have, a night, we go out and have a really nice meal or whatever. So it's this place here in chapter 16 in Exodus is one of the two places that quail show up. The other is in Numbers 11. And it's another moment where the people are complaining. They're complaining about not having meat and all this kind of stuff. And so God says, "Oh, you want meat? I'll show you meat." And he said the quail descend upon the camp up to their waists, I think. And they just, they're just picking it off the ground and eating it. But then the scripture says that as soon as the quail meat touches their mouth, they found it distasteful, and they start vomiting it out of their mouth. It's just gross. It's a really gross scene, but it's in Numbers 11, and that's the only other time that that quail show up.
Why would they not eat any of the sheep if they wanted meat?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That is a good yeah.
They were taking it with them. I mean, we're crying out loud.
Right, I know. Yeah. Them and
That's just part of being stiff-necked.
I guess. So, and I wonder, I mean, if they've got if they've got sheep there, then obviously they've got milk, and yeah, they'd have they'd have meat, I guess, at some point. You know, they're not regularly sacrificed. They're not regularly sacrificing as they're on the move. So, you know, typically there's this, I think it's in Deuteronomy, where there's a provision for there to be meat, for you to kill an animal and eat it as a family, outside of a worship act, because, you know, when you read the Torah and you read the provisions for sacrifices and things like that, yes, the priests get some of the meat, you know, they get a couple of specific pieces, but then, you know, the other portions are for, you know, the family that offered the sacrifice. So, but it's part of a worship act. There's a passage in Deuteronomy where it says, basically, you can barbecue if you want. It doesn't say that, but it's like, if you want to have a barbecue, if you want to kill a calf, and, you know, or you know, an ox or whatever, and have a barbecue, it doesn't have to be a religious ceremony part of that. So there's one of my Old Testament professors pointed out that particular passage where it turns from, you have to have it's not a sacrifice, it's a barbecue, basically. Anyway, so that's free of charge. There you go. So let's see. They eat manna for 40 years. All right. Number 7, Israelites continue to follow God's lead in the wilderness, but find themselves without water once again at Rephidim. And so what's their response this time? Well, their response is quarreling this time. It's different than complaining, although in just a second they'll complain as well. So their response is quarreling, and Moses goes further to say, why do you test the Lord? But verse 3, the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses. Why'd you bring this out here? So their response is complaining. Their response is quarreling. Moses responds with questioning. But then verse 4, Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with this people? So again, he's crying out to the Lord, which is what he's supposed to do. And then the Lord's response is, well, we'll just make water come out of this rock. You know, like you do, right? I guess if you're the Lord, that's what you do.
Yeah.
So, all right. Then number 8 is, how is God's provision of water from a rock an even greater miracle than what he does at Marah, which was just tossing in the branch? So this is another discussion question for you to kind of ponder around. What do you think? You know, how is it even better? How is it even greater than turning bitter water sweet? And so have some conversation in your group about that. I just think, you know, we don't think of rocks as having water in them. So to, you know, strike the rock and all of a sudden there's water everywhere. You know, that's pretty cool. I think that's a bigger miracle than Marah, which I consider a miracle as well. Okay. Number 9 is, what's the significance of the names given to the place where God makes water come out of a rock? So they're Massah and Meribah. And this is in verse 7. It says, he called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So they call it testing, quarreling, and the questioning of the people is in direct conflict with the promise of the presence of God, because they're asking, or they're testing with this question of, is the Lord among us or not? So it's diametrically opposed to the promise of his presence. I will be with you, way back in chapter 3. Now, a lot's happened since chapter 3, but they are still pushing back against, is God with us? You know, they're still, again, their focus is, we don't have any water, we don't have any food. What are we doing here? And that's their focus. So they're having the way that I phrase it in my message is, they're having a hard time lifting their heads, lifting their eyes up to see the broader landscape of what God is doing in them and through them and for them. So, all right. So number 10, how do each of the ways in which God provides for the Israelites in this week's reading underscore God's promise of presence? So so you start with that one. I start with bitter water, manna. Or you can do the oasis at Elim, manna, quail, water from a rock, and then the defeat of the Amalekites. Those are the ones I would have you look at, or have your class look at. If you want to expand that back to crossing the Red Sea, you can do that as well, because again, it's right there. It's certainly an underscoring of God's promise of presence. And then why would God need to offer these additional ways of understanding that his presence was true? Again, can discuss how, what the people's attitude was, where their heads were, and I would even go, I might even go to a point of, talking about how if they're only, let's say 2-3 months out from their time in slavery, they still have that mindset, in that slavery mindset in them, that they're told what to do, that they're punished if they push back on anything, the whole bricks without straw thing. So they're finding their way, and they're feeling their way into being the people of God, and they're not there yet. They're not, and they won't be for another 40 years. But I think that God is going to, over the course of the next 40 years, he's going to continually reveal his promise of presence to them, so that it can get through to them. I mean, just think about how many times you have to tell your kids, don't do that because it's gonna hurt, or or whatever. Any kind of lesson that people need to learn, sometimes they either have to learn it tragically, or they have to learn it over time. Sometimes people learn, I never had to learn don't touch the hot stove the quick way. I never put my hand onto a hot stove. But that doesn't mean my mom didn't tell me not to do it. It just took me, I just had to learn over time. And then once I started using it, then I was like, oh yeah, that's why you don't do that. So it's that kind of thing.
I'm thinking that, they just, some people need a visual reminder, like people want to see miracles to remind them that God is there.
Right.
And I think the Israelites, they had, and you see that later with the golden calf, they wanted a God they could see, that they knew was going with them. And the idea of an invisible God that was, even though he was providing for them, I guess they just couldn't wrap their heads around that.
Right. Well, and they've just come out of 430 years of slavery in Egypt, which is full of depictions of deities. there's all kinds of Egyptian gods that would have been depicted in statues and in artwork and all that kind of stuff all over the place. They would have seen it all the time, and so they're gonna see those visuals. And so sometimes I wonder if part of me wonders if the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, were obviously they were visual things. I wonder if they just weren't detailed enough to be like, okay, my God looks like a cloud or looks like a pillar of cloud. That might not have worked for everybody. They're like, no, does he have like a long nose and, does he have a head of a dog, or, what does he, have hands like me? What? And so there's that visual side of things too. So, very good, thanks. All right, and then the last question is another discussion question of some specific ways you've seen God move in your life that make you look around and marvel at the reality of God hearing your prayers and answering them in ways you couldn't even imagine. So that should be an interesting question to have folks jump into and talk about. And there's, they don't have to be like earth-shattering kinds of ways. It just, there are all kinds of prayers that get answered in ways that can only be, credited to God. So I've been trying to keep track of some of those as we're getting closer to opening the building. And so I have a little note card in my prayer notebook. And so I've written down a few things. You can't read my chicken scratch, sorry. Sometimes I can't read my chicken scratch, but just little things that happen that tell me that we're still moving forward. And so, like built-in cabinets, they're being installed right now. Like you hear sawing in the back. It's because the built-in cabinets in the walkthrough and in the workspace are being installed right now. So, and something else got delivered just a minute ago, which I think is our folding chair cart that we were waiting on. So anyway, little things like that. All right. Any other questions that y'all have?
Was there some reason why they didn't just on their own pray to God about all these things instead of just complaining and quarreling?
I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know.
I thought this came up in one of my other Bible studies, and I thought that, well, maybe this was too early for them, but at some point, the only the priest could take prayers to God. The people weren't really allowed to pray on their own to God, is what I thought. So maybe this, maybe that's the reason they complained. Plus, what you said was they needed to complain to some person,
Right?
And they couldn't see God, so how would they know for sure that he was hearing them? So they'd rather complain to a person.
Right. Yeah, it's probably something like that.
So like something goes wrong, I complain to George, because the cause of the complaint of my complaint isn't there, like a company or something.
Right,
So
right,
you complain to somebody that is near and can hear you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Kids the kids come running in the kitchen. So and so did something to me, and it's like, did you talk to them? Well, no, because well, I didn't do so and so to you. So anyway,
We always find it easier to complain than to try and fix a situation.
Yep.
That's our sinful human nature.
Right. It is indeed. Very good. Okay. Well, so again, our plan is to open for in-person worship on the 3rd. That means I will be taking a week break from this material, and it'll be a standalone message. And one of the weeks of the series will not have a message attached to it. Next week, the next week's worth of readings is through the 10 Commandments. We're not going to skip the 10 Commandments, so don't worry about that. It'll be one of the later ones, and but just go ahead and have your. I'll put another study guide out this weekend, and just have your classes continue to work through those and do the readings, and you'll be at some point in time a week ahead, and we'll catch up probably in about 3 weeks. We'll cycle back to being on schedule again. So anyway, all righty.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah,
Y'all
thank
have
you
a
very
great-
much.
Yeah, y'all have a great rest of your week. If you need anything, give me a
You
holler.
too.
Okay. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Dean. So
And
sorry
Gail,
to
too.
hear about your friend.